Three. You're live.
Hey, everyone. It will look ridiculous. They're trying to, after a secret trial and put in jail under a secret name. And even the people that ran the jail didn't know that he was actually a security services guy who had crossed the government. And when people found out about the fact that that could happen in Australia, I mean, that's the sort of thing we criticise China over. But the idea that we could disappear people in Australia shocked a lot of people. And anyway, he's doing he's out of jail now, but he's doing a financial settlement, and he's quite close to me. And he said the government want to settle his case because it's been so embarrassing. Another guy who worked for the tax office, who was the same as me, and he worked for and he said, you know, we are running our public organisations as if we're a corrupt corporation, and the tax office was doing a lot of very underhand things to take tax off people illegally, and just throwing the rule book and the law book out the window. And he became a tax whistleblower. And he, like me, he was charged for speaking to the press, and he is facing, like me, over 100 years in prison. And he contacted me recently to say the government had, secretly contacted him and said, we're interested in settling your case. Now, that's, they still, I tend to think that they, I will be the last person on the list because I've embarrassed them a lot. But the fact that they're even considering settling some of the whistleblower cases, I think, is a very interesting atmospheric. I think the Assange case, it can't be ruled out that the atmospherics of that are helping. We are very much an outwardly focused nation. We have something called a cultural cringe, and often we won't do something in Australia till we see the Americans or the United States do it, and then we'll go, oh, really? If they can do it, we can do it. But we won't go out and do it on our own, which is the opposite to our reputation. But so I think those overseas cases, and especially the fact that Julian Assange has got a lot of very credible supporters, is having an effect. As I said, it's only slight effects, but my background is criminal law, and you know that these small atmospherics make a difference. And if you guys, as you've kindly said you might do, start sending emails from America to Australian politicians, that will have quite a big effect, because we are jealous of our reputation overseas, and we will be thinking, shit, if people in America care about this, maybe we should care about it a bit more. So I'm very grateful. And basically my mood is hopeful. It's a bit like the Second World War. It's a sort of Stalingrad, it's the turning point. There's still a fair way to go, but I do think we're actually starting to get some victories rather than some defeats.
And I think that sorry, Andrew. I think that you bring up a good point, because I've kind of noticed it too. We've had some talk of a pardon for Snowden, and it's, being covered in the media. And, we now have the Assange trial, and, the prosecution has been getting embarrassed almost daily. You have Daniel Ellsberg kicking ass in court, and all these other amazing witnesses who are just destroying the prosecution's case. And we have seen kind of a more kind of public support growing, and it's I'm usually a cynic, but I've noticed it too, and it is kind of encouraging. It's this kind of underneath the surface, you can feel like this bubbling of people are starting to understand that like a Julian Assange, he exposed war criminals, and that's a good thing, and we should be okay with that and grateful to him for doing it. And it's such a backwards mentality to protect the war criminals and penalize the people who expose them. So I think that that's a really good point, especially for people like me who are usually cynical and very pessimistic. There is kind of, a shift in narrative and, like you said, the atmosphere. And so that is really encouraging.
It was one point I was going to make, and I'd forgotten, but you picked up on it. In a word, it's media. There has been coverage, and before there wasn't, and that was why you guys have done such terrific work, because you've kept it. And whether it's a cynical thing that newspapers will print whatever sells, I don't know. But it's interesting in Australia, as you would know. Most of the conservative media is controlled by Rupert Murdoch. There's only a few media companies, like the US, and even the sort of non-Murdoch conservative, the equivalent of the New York Times and the Washington Post, was not covering Assange at all, and now they both are. Most days, I think, for the extradition hearing, there has been a story in both the Australian, both conservative newspapers have at least covered it. They don't have to, run the line that you and I would agree with, but they just cover it, and that's a huge change. And what was quite worrying is that the first whistleblower trial off the bat in Australia was a guy called Bernard Collaery, who effectively leaked the fact that we used our spies, our CIA equivalent, to spy on the East Timor government in order to give the information to an Australian oil company in order to make more money. And this guy, one of the spies, said, we're not meant to be doing that. We're not meant to be spying using national resources in order to benefit corporations. Now, when his trial is about the same as mine, but he's had some preliminary hearings. And the scary thing was those preliminary hearings were not covered by the mainstream media at all. And then the government managed to, gag them, even though there was no real right to gag. They'd obviously got very scared at the slightest, hint by the government to say you're not allowed to cover it, and they didn't cover it. And that was worrying. But this is quite different. Now Assange does get coverage every day. His partner Stella is in the news a lot. That human face has come out, and I think that's a change. I certainly continue to get coverage. And the great thing is the war crimes, as you said, the war crimes is a good one to keep bashing, because for whatever reason, the average person gets it. They get the fact that if we blew up a village and slaughtered innocents, that wasn't right. They don't necessarily get the diplomatic cables and things that went on at a higher level, which are actually probably a lot worse. But it's sometimes we have to work with what we've got, and people are being grabbed. And I think I'm glad that they are emphasising the collateral murder video. I think that's really good, and to keep bashing not so much Julian Assange's personal life, but to say, look at what WikiLeaks discovered. Look at these terrible war crimes, atrocities, people being murdered, murders being covered up. That's not right. That's not what we stand for. And WikiLeaks exposed that. And how can you put the person behind that in jail for doing so? That's actually what I'm trying to push in my own case. Is that it was not only an option for me to be a whistleblower, but it was actually my duty to be a whistleblower.
Absolutely. And one of the things here that I think is really exciting with Julian's case is the fact that a lot of these war crimes and a lot of these like torture programs and things like that are coming out. Because one of the ones that struck me as like particularly heinous was the Khalid al-Nasiri statements and those proceedings.
I think it's Masri. El-Masri.
I'm sorry. Yeah, El-Masri. I'm sorry. He was the German that was abducted out of Macedonia, renditioned to Afghanistan, and then dropped in Albania. And it was the actual WikiLeaks releases that were able to have him start court proceedings in Germany. And little things like, not little, but things like that people don't really know the story of. I'm excited as the Action for Assange Vigil to be able to go through those once court wraps up and we have other things, or have more time, I guess would be the right word there. But we had in court today, the fact that there's going to be the two whistleblowers from UC Global are going to be able to testify. And I was just wondering what your opinions about the UC Global case are, or if you have heard anything about it.
I don't know much about it, and I saw the one about Al-Masri, which I thought was great. And I'm embarrassed to say I don't have time to stay on top of all the various different.
It's a lot. It is literally until we went live, I was working on putting a document together just to help people follow day by day what was happening and put all the articles in one spot.
I miss shit all the time. Don't feel bad.
Yeah.
we all do.
Oh my God, I want to know because I get too angry about it. But that I think the UC Global one is really good. Again, a bit like the war crimes, because the average person, thinks that there is something wrong about that. Even the mainstream press, like the Daily Mail or, in the UK, very mainstream stuff. I think they didn't think that, the person on the tube in London doesn't think that was great, that this security company that thought they were so smart was working, for the Americans, probably for the CIA, and videotaping him and trying to get DNA from the nappy and all sorts of. I think the fact that I was quite surprised to see that the employees are testifying against that guy, and good on the Spanish for taking it. Again, these things all like snowflakes falling on the cedars. The fact that the Spanish government are taking that seriously means that Bereza has to sort of say, well, I'm going to let these people testify secretly. And again, that's good because, again, it adds a little bit of a mystery. These secret witnesses are coming in. And I think slowly people begin to see it's pretty murky. And if they didn't have anything to hide, why are they trying to hide it? And I think it's a great one. It hasn't had much play out here, but you mentioned it in the introduction to say the IMF loan to Ecuador. I mean, I think that's something that needs to be pushed to say the Americans were so, the US government, they were so determined to get him, they basically staged a coup. That's kind of, the more we kind of bash that stuff to say, who are the good guys here? Because.
Well, I think that's a good point because there's so many of those things. I think really if you just talk to people and you tell them all of these different, just mind-boggling things that are happening in this case. I mean, forget about what you think about, and I hate when people say this, but forget about what you think about Julian Assange personally. Tear all of that stuff away. Take all of the noise that you hear away and just boil it down to the basics. And what this is a journalist is being prosecuted for doing his job and exposing corruption amongst power. And that's something that we should be seriously concerned about. And I think when you boil it all down and you explain to people, I mean, the Caitlin Johnstone article debunking all of the smears is so helpful in this because people there's been a decade-long propaganda campaign against this one human being. And that's a lot to combat. I mean, that's a lot to try to, fight back against. But that's exactly what we have to do. I mean, we have to have these conversations with people and explain to them about UC Global and about, the decade-long smear campaign and about how, they spied on first of all, he's an Australian citizen being charged under US law and held in a UK court or in a UK jail. Like, it's so convoluted and crazy, and there's so much wrong with what's happening. And I think a lot of people just don't know.
That's great. And it's good to get away from Julian and to talk about what he actually exposed and to talk about WikiLeaks and to talk about this sort of. Some people don't want to know, and as you said, I mix, and we have to be honest about the fact that not everybody supports us. And I spoke to a woman who was, a wealthy woman. She's a sort of relative by marriage, sort of me, don't know well, but she was, her mother was a Holocaust survivor, so you reckon that, that she'd be pretty, she'd be pretty happy about whistleblowers, whatever. But she said, "Oh, I don't like Julian Assange. He's a narcissist." And yet, saying that, she was she'd seen this sort of the murder of George Floyd, and she was very moved by that. She thought that was kind of bad. But you're right. There is a sort of there is a blockage in people's minds about what's really going on, and the smear campaign has been successful. And what we need to do in retaliation, I think they're doing it already, but is to really emphasise that whatever you think about Julian Assange, what he exposed is like 1,000 times worse. I did a tweet about it to say, look, even though it's never been proved that anybody got killed as a result of WikiLeaks leaks, let's just say, for argument's sake, there was 4 people, for argument's sake. Now, there's no doubt, if you compare that to how many people were killed, in the Iraq, Afghanistan war, let alone Libya or Syria, and especially if you're the sort of person that says, I don't like Julian Assange because he endangered sources and good, honest, people that work for the government. I can assure you, let's just, if we're using the number 4, at least 4,000 good people who work for the government in some form were sacrificed, by George Bush, Tony Blair, whatever, in a very cynical way. And they would, for their own selfish reasons and without any rule of law being followed. And if you think Julian Assange killed people, and that's bad, we need to start looking at the people that killed thousands and thousands and thousands of very good, honest, our best people, the people that put their lives on the line for the country. We slaughtered them, we sacrificed them for bullshit. And he exposed that, and I think that needs to be respected.
That's actually one of the points that Daniel Ellsberg made quite beautifully during his testimony during Julian's trial, and it was in relation to him with the Pentagon Papers. He actually did say in court that, yeah, there was at least one person that got really harmed because of these releases that I did, referring to the Pentagon Papers. And he pointed out that how in Chelsea Manning's case, the U.S. government was forced to say no one was harmed by any of the disclosures. And then he went a step further to the exact point that you were making and said, even if someone was hurt, doesn't the fact that he exposed 15,000 people killed matter? Like, doesn't that mean something in relation to the fact that he did such a good job that the U.S. government was forced to admit no one got hurt? So I thought that was a really powerful.
You suck up people and saying, if you care about the idea that 1 or 2 people might have been hurt, you need to care a whole lot more. Like 15,000. And what I heard the other day from Brown University figures that they calculated 4 million people that had been killed in the sort of Middle Eastern wars. It started after 2001. 4 million. And 38,000 homeless. I mean, so if you care about those things, clearly we have to deal with the most egregious crimes first, and the most egregious crimes have been committed by the politicians and the generals, not the leakers.
Something else I wanted to ask you about too. Like recently, a lot of people have been talking about what an existential threat Donald Trump is to democracy. I can't think of anything more damaging or dangerous to democracy than this kind of destruction of press freedom. So have you noticed that too, about how, it really frustrates me to see people who should know better pretending like Donald Trump is this just crazy threat to humanity while ignoring actual threats to humanity. Is that something that you...
Yeah, no, I picked up on that as well. And it's kind of, it is very frustrating the way people get so animated about, two-party elections and not realize that there are much worse things going on. And and press freedom probably doesn't really get it enough, because that's only part of the issue. But yeah, the idea that governments can commit crimes and governments can murder people, that's a whole lot more dangerous than Trump's tweet, and yet people don't necessarily get that. I agree. It's very frustrating to say what's really a threat to democracy. I think democracy is a real threat. It's the idea we can start a war and drop bombs on someone who's innocent in order to win votes and still win the election as a result of a totally unjustified and unjust war. And then we can kill people who try to expose that, and no one does anything about it. And that's not Trump. That's our system, and I agree. The idea that people would care more about Trump than the security services doing rendition or CIA black sites or murders, and they seem to have a very warped sense of proportion and what really matters. And I agree. And that the press are somewhat to blame for that. And I guess that they've been manipulated a lot. We've seen a lot. I've learned a lot from you guys about the sort of CIA, manipulating the press and things like that. The sort of the bounty gate way they can get stories like that in there. I've got contacted. I was quite pleased to see an Australian guy, a bit like me. He worked for the military. And he contacted me and said he's not a whistleblower, but he did say, I'm quite concerned that I've been told by my friends, and he was quite high level in the military, but in the intelligence community in the military, that we are going to war in China. We're going to, at the outside, it'll be 2 years away, and, most likely, 1 year away. And, we're doing it for all the wrong reasons, but to boost votes and to boost government military spending and justify buying expensive fighter jets, and now that's a whole lot more worrying than Donald Trump's hairstyle. Yet people don't necessarily see that.
So we had a question in the chat. Is Andy Worthington going to testify? Testify tomorrow. I believe he is one of. And I apologize, this is from Nat over in the Action for Assange Mexico group.
We love you, Nat. We love you.
I believe he's going to testify tomorrow. We had, and I'm pulling up my document here, we had a list of people who said they're going to be, who the prosecution and defense both agreed are going to be doing statements only. So let me pull that up here real quick. And I'll put this tweet in chat for everybody too, just so they can see it. This is from the Defense Assange account. They said the witness and prosecution have agreed on several witness statements, including Noam Chomsky, Stefania Maruzzi, Cockburn, and several others. This leaves just Andy Worthington and Jamel Jeffer as potential witnesses to be called live, and 2 other witnesses that still need to be agreed on, as well as the witnesses from, I don't know if this includes those with those 2 others, but the witnesses from UC Global. So we should have Andy Worthington and Jamel here in the next couple days, but I will send that link through so you can take a look at those, because there was a little more discussion about witnesses a little further up in the thread there too. But sorry, just to pivot back here, David, I wanted to ask you about well, we were talking about like the changing of the tide, so to speak, and like the raising of public consciousness about the issues of whistleblowers and private intelligence communities and things like that. Do you think that Australians have a sense of the level of, I don't think infiltration is the right word because of how deep it is, but the level of control that intelligence agencies have over governments now?
No, I don't think they have any idea. And that's why it's lucky that we've got this, the Bernard Cleary case, and which is one of the first times when people thought, why are the intelligence services working for an oil company? And even though that's not the biggest issue. As I said, it's a snowflake falling down, and people are beginning to realize if they're able to do that, what else are they doing? No, I think that's probably my next target. If after I win my case, is to say that there's a lot more going on here than just war crimes, and the intelligence services. They've got a lot to answer for. The fact that they think that they can manipulate governments and throw them over, and I'm hoping that the Epstein, the thing might shed some light on that, and I hope. I've seen the trailers for the Comey rule? The Comey. I'm hoping
I saw that. So we just got back from 3 weeks in DC, and the first time I saw the Comey rule advertisement, it was on a bus driving around downtown Washington. And I had no idea what it was. Like, I had to look it up. I was like, there's no way they're making a show about this. And it's to get back to like propaganda and how stuff like that's used. The Comey special is being released at the same time that Hillary Clinton is starting her own podcast, which I think is super interesting. Like, I may make my own channel just to debunk everything Hillary Clinton says, but that's a whole nother aside. But I thought that was super crazy that they're actually going to try to put a show out about Comey and see how far it goes.
Yeah, no, it's pretty funny, and I laughed as well when I saw it, and I kind of choked on my beer. But it's pretty funny. But I mean, publicity is good. The problem that we have, and you have as well, is that they are exempt from freedom of information and the security services, intelligence services, and it's hard. It's harder if anyone's a whistleblower within them. They just get gagged and chucked in jail. It's not easy to expose the sort of terrible things that they do, and it won't happen overnight, because basically the man in the street, woman in the street, they basically trust their security services. It's probably too confronting for them not to. But if Snowden gets pardoned, and if Assange wins, and if I win, we will be able to start saying, we need to look into what's going on in our name, because they're not working for us. They're working for themselves, and that's a long-term plan. But thank God people like you are already looking into that. And it will only probably the public don't need, it's a bit like, the Comey rule. They don't need to know everything that they've done. But if we could expose a really egregious case, a single case where the security services took it upon themselves to try to destabilize a government, and I think that would stick, like Ellsberg or whatever. One really good hit on them, and people would start be saying, should they really have the power that they do, and are they more dangerous to us than the enemies that they pretend to be protecting us from?
The problem is a lot of the enemies that they protect us from are the enemies that they created.
Yeah, absolutely. And I saw something good about I don't know. I'd love to be able to include this in my book, because I start off in my transformation, I guess, from being a sort of very much a true believer and a lifetime soldier, and to seeing more and more holes in the Western nations' narrative about what happened in Afghanistan. And I saw a good John Pilger posted something about it this year, a few months ago, and Abby Martin's covered it in a movie. But the idea that we were meddling in Afghanistan before the Russians even got there, and we were paying and sponsoring these hardline Islamic terrorists that eventually became the Taliban, that we made that. We made ISIS. I mean, Hillary Clinton has said we made ISIS, and she said it in she thought that was the funniest thing ever. But we did, for someone that worked in the military and was there at the COP, we did make ISIS. we did make Al Qaeda. That's right, and people. Snowden's touched on this, and they are the really worrying things. They're the things I want to focus on, to say that the problem that we were trying to solve was a problem of our own making, and a problem. It's a bit like the arsonists. We've had a few cases like this in Australia, who are firefighters. Probably had them in America, who start fires in order to put them out, in order to look good and become heroic. And that's a bit of as you know, but I mean, to try to get the people to say, and I think that was one of the good things. I recently watched the story about the Washington Post, the movie about the Washington Post, Meryl Streep, I think, and it was quite good in that she, the Catherine Graham character is good because she kind of represents that sort of establishment, middle class. But when the idea that her own son was sent to a war by people who knew that it was all going to be useless and knew that he could possibly die achieving nothing, it really brings it home to her. And even though Robert McNamara is her friend, she's prepared to run an anti-McNamara story because she's appalled when it's brought back to her own son and her own life. She can see that that's wrong, and I hope that we can get to do that. To say that a lot of these Islamic terrorists, terrible people that we demonize, we created them, we paid them, and that's pretty disturbing. And as I said, it's a long game to get that out, but that's one of the biggest things that I would like to do. I'd like to eventually go to the Middle East and work in trying to repair those fences, and to say, look, we acknowledge our own part in this mess, usually due to security services who have a very short-term and pretty lowbrow idea about what's going to be good for the Western world, and to kind of expose that, because they know it. The terrible thing is that they all know it in the Middle East, and if we could admit it, we would go a long way to solving those problems. And and if we could work out a way to bring it back to the mums and dads of America and Australia, to say, a lot of these bad guys were, we were enemies of our own creation because that suited our domestic political to win votes, basically. That's a powerful.
So we have a friend over in Australia. Her name's Mimi. She goes by Syrian Girl, at Partisan Girl on Twitter.
She contacted me, this week.
Yes, I was actually about to say I'd love to connect you guys, because she's a Syrian and also an Australian, and she's living in Australia right now. And she has a wonderful audience. She has a lot of influence and a lot of knowledge about what has transpired and in the Middle East, like firsthand experience. And we had her on the show a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about collateral murder, and she didn't necessarily understand why it made such an impact in the US when it was released. And it came down to she had seen videos like collateral murder on a regular basis. It wasn't anything that was being hidden. Everyone knows of the United States war crimes if you're from the Middle East. But in the US, we have such a sheltered view. And the only things we've seen of those wars when they were being broadcast were the embedded correspondence and the Fox News approved and MSNBC approved anchors.
Or the beautiful bombs. What was that Brian Williams fucking quote? That's all we saw of it. We saw it like a fucking video game. That's all we see of war. It's ridiculous.
And so collateral murder was one of the first raw videos of what US war actually looks like. So I think your idea of going over there and being on the ground and exposing what's happening firsthand makes such a huge difference, because the US gets spoon-fed this idea about our military. So something like that, I think, would be super, super honorable and super cool to even be able to help broadcast as you're doing it.
Yeah, it absolutely would. And I actually also want to bring up the fact that, and as Steve says all the time, that this country is the most propagandized country on earth. And I think that that's something that we also need to focus on, is that that's why independent media is so crucial, because we are in a battle for narrative, basically. The reason why we, can't have these discussions more openly is because people don't know what's going on. Our mainstream media doesn't talk about it. Our independent media doesn't even talk about it. It's glossed over. It's, kind of just accepted as normal. And I think that's a huge part of why we have to hold independent media accountable. It really, that's the biggest thing that we're fighting against, is the propaganda machine. And they're very good, and they have lots of money, and it's been very effective. And so the fact that we're battling against that, like, we need all hands on deck, to push back against that.
Yeah, no, that's my next project. One of them, I've got so many, but a book or a movie called Information Operations, Info Ops. And you're right, because we in Australia, we have been taught by the US now about using the information as a weapon. And obviously, it's a tongue-in-cheek term, and that it really means lies. But the idea that and it started on the ground, like the idea that you could put out a false statement. If you wanted to get a member of the Taliban killed, for example, you could put out a false statement through your informer network to say he's actually a double agent, that guy, and you'd leave some clue to say he was taking money, and hopefully his own people might kill him. Okay, so that's an information operation, but we have. I think that's been extended, that we now use it on our own people, in the sense that it's okay to use false information to try to bamboozle the enemy or whatever, but we use false information to try to bamboozle the electorate, which is now considered the enemy. And so we will say such and such is a bad guy, or this is what's happening in Syria, or when it's not true. And yet we're able to get the public on side, and it's very insidious. It's hard to explain. You guys will get it. You're smart enough to get it. It's hard to explain to the average person. But, and Julian Assange has touched on this, to say that the wars are generally started by lies, and they're maintained by lies. And there was no, and it's good for me. I've got an advantage, having been a soldier, and I still am a relatively sort of conservative person. I can use that. To be able to say, look, there's nothing wrong with war per se. There's nothing wrong with soldiers. I'm not writing that down. I'm a lifetime soldier myself. But we have to be coming from the moral high ground. And once we start lying about what we do, we do actually become the bad guys. And that happened a lot in Afghanistan. And we were, whatever reason we may have been there to begin with, that changed and changed, and it became a self-licking ice cream, as they say. And I think when they realised it was a vote winner, they expanded it to Iraq and Syria and Libya, because for one of the really sad reason is that having a fast jet flying over a Middle Eastern town and dropping a bomb on people in turbans and carrying AK-47s, won votes. You look like a strong leader. You looked presidential, and all the people that got promoted were people that advocated more bombing and more surges and more, because that's what looked good. And it's the sort of end of democracy, or the short circuiting of democracy, where we are doing things just for show. Often, which are really bad for the long term of our democracy. And that's an existential threat to democracy. The idea that we create enemies, we go to war with these created enemies, we kill our own people cynically, as well as other people, but we even kill our own people in false narratives, and we say that it was all for a good cause, and we do that just to kind of win the swinging voter over to think that we're good guys. That's an existential threat to democracy. And that information operations, the idea that it's okay to put out false narratives in the press for some sort of long-term goal, and the denial of the idea that if our government is continually lying to us about what's going on, we are actually the world's bad guys. We're no longer the world's good guys.
So I did want to ask, because we've probably got about 10 to 15 minutes before we start wrapping up. I wanted to get your opinion on Australia's use of, Australia literally just arresting protesters because of Facebook posts. I don't know how to word it any less draconian.
I know what you mean. I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, no, it's pretty. And again, it's a bit like me, and I've said it before, and some people don't like me saying it, but it may be, in order to help the greater cause, I might need to go to jail because it gets more, you get more publicity that way, and if you really want big change, that causes sacrifice. But that was a big dent in the credibility of the government when they went and arrested someone, and it was someone a bit like George Floyd. It was caught on camera or on phone. Them going to arrest, and she was a pregnant, mother of 2 or something, and she was at home. They came around heavy-handed because she forwarded a Facebook post about a sort of anti-lockdown protest, and it shows you that the security services, the police, they don't have they can't think for themselves about what's proportional and what's rational. And in some ways, that really backfired on the government because people said, what sort of world are we living in now where, and the police, you reckon that there might be more serious things that they're looking out for than this kind of low-hanging fruit about face. But yeah, it happened. It actually happened. And it shows you that, the same way that I'm facing, 200 years in jail or something for just trying to expose crime, but it's such a dystopian society that your intentions or your beliefs don't seem to matter, and if you transgressed some sort of law or a matter of principle, you could get arrested, and she was lucky that it was filmed. She could have been put in jail secretly for all we know. Things have come a long way, but nobody, while it caused a little bit of embarrassment for the government, funnily enough, the police, didn't come out and say, yeah, we've gone mad or whatever. So it shows you, it's a bit like the boiling frog. It shows you that if we don't stand up for these things, it won't be, it won't be long before the stormtroopers will be marching in, to me, taking me away while I'm giving this talk to you guys, and vice versa with you. But yeah, it's getting pretty scary. And again, in some ways it's good for us because it's showing the average person, people who are not necessarily politically motivated, that they need to care about what's going on, and that they need to at least have an opinion about things like that, because it won't be long before you're not allowed to have an opinion.
I don't think a lot of people realize that this has been something that's been slow walked for a very long time. This is something that's been building for, decades, but really over the past probably 10 to 15 years, it's really escalated. We see it with, just random people getting arrested for Facebook posts. A woman was arrested at a football game for not wearing a mask by a cop who was not wearing a mask, which is so American. Like it's the quintessential America 2020 image. But this is something like these attacks on, the press and our civil liberties. These are things that it's been slow walked for a very long time. And I don't think you're right. It is the frog in, the boiling pot. Everybody's just kind of standing around looking at each other with their thumbs up their asses while their rights are being taken away. And we're marching into legitimate fascism. I think that's a huge, another piece of the whole narrative control is that we have to start getting people to recognize how bad it really is. You know, people get really distracted by their reality TV and their Kardashians and all that stuff. And I'm not, I shouldn't say it like that, because I understand that, especially now, people are very stressed out. They're very busy. They're working 2-3 jobs. They have kids. They're now trying to homeschool their kids. So I get why people aren't informed as much as they need to be. But that is, again, where we have to really try to fight back against that narrative, and really all hands on deck trying to push back against it, because that really is the front line of every other battle that we're dealing with.
Yeah, no, I agree. And again, I can't thank you guys enough. And it's really good. It's fun to do these talks, but it's really good to sort of to push the message out there, because people will get it if it's explained to them, you know, if it's put in front of their faces. And, you know, and if we think of clever ways to do it, I mean, speaking of the Kardashians have put out quite a few good public service messages. But yeah, same in Australia. It frustrates me. People in Australia, you'd have the equivalent of, people care more about, you know, this sort of interstate football game, you know, in Australia than they do about, you know, people being put in jail forever. And that makes me angry. You kind of think, really? I mean, who cares who wins between, you know, New South Wales and Queensland? If you spend half the time looking at these issues, you might realise that there are more important things going on. And the good thing about those things, it shows you that it's not about over there or some sort of like bad guy or whatever. It affects all of us, and it could be our own kids that get, you know, and if we don't stop the downward trajectory and send it back up again, however slowly, we will be giving a very unpleasant world for our own children to live in. So I think it is worth pushing those messages out in any way that we can, because one of the things that it shows you, talk about the boiling frog and the 20 years. When I was first starting my case, one of the issues I was trying to push is to say you can't use anti-terrorism laws to put someone who's just a critic of the government in jail. And it's funny, I thought the government would be quite embarrassed by that, but they were just like, oh, yeah, we can. You know, they really, in quite a cynical way, they actually think it's all right to use laws designed for people who want to blow up buildings to put people in jail who just have an opinion about the government breaking the law. So it's a real cynicism, and it's really quite dangerous to think that they actually think critics of the government are terrorists, and it can be treated as such.
Well, here in the U.S., we had the United States, I can't remember the DEI. Whatever. There was some intelligence organization here in the U.S. That released the National Counterintelligence Strategy 2020 to 2022, which said that hacktivists, leaktivists, and public disclosure organizations like media outlets are in the same level of terrorist organization as Al Qaeda and Al Nusra right now, and ISIS and Hezbollah. And it's crazy that the government of the United States, nonetheless, can put out a document saying a public disclosure organization is a terrorist group, while at the same time having things like CNN and MSNBC and Fox exist that are just non-stop state propaganda outlets.
I mean, what the hell's a leaktivist? That would be a whistleblower, I would assume.
Right.
I mean, they're basically saying whistleblowers are terrorists. That's fucked up.
Yeah, and they believe it. The terrible thing is
they call environmentalists terrorists. I mean, you get the people who chain themselves to pipelines or whatever, and those people are now called terrorists. That's crazy. They're environmentalists. They just want clean water. Like, that's it.
God damn them.
I know. Assholes.
But we do have to start wrapping up here because we have to be up probably about 7 hours to start doing court coverage again. So I would like to thank you very much for joining us, David. If you could give us some final thoughts and where people can find and support you.
Well, my final thoughts again to thank you guys. I'm glad I got the time difference right. And keep up the good work. I really do think things are changing. And so that's the good news for you, is to say it's not just, hot air, or you're not wasting your time. You're fighting the good fight. And in years to come, we will be the French resistance. People will want to be us. So keep that up. I've got a GoFundMe page. It's called something like 50 years in jail for blowing the whistle on the ADF. I appreciate any small donations. I know everybody's doing it tough. I don't ask for much, but if you wanted to give something, that's good, or even just pass it on to friends, because it's the more people that know about my case, the more it helps Julian Assange, because people. I think there's strength in numbers, and the more if people say there's a guy in Australia who has a similar story to Julian Assange, and there's Snowden, and there's 3 other whistleblowers in Australia who are all on trial at the same time, in different fields. One a spook, one a tax guy, and people begin to get the message that something is wrong in the Western world. So we all help each other. And just invite me back on. I'd like that. So thank you for your work.
We'll get you back on again soon.
Yeah, you are welcome anytime. And I also have another show. Look at that. See, I remembered self-promotion, you guys.
Hey, Misty.
So I have another show, David, and we would totally love to have you on. I co-host it with my friend Jeremy. Yeah, it's called Facts on the Ground. We're just a little baby channel, but we would love to have you on. But yeah, as always, thank you guys for letting me co-host. Thank you, David, for coming on. Thank you, everybody in the chat. Also, huge thank you to everybody on Twitter who is retweeting my tweets, or also tweeting at the people that I'm tweeting at. Huge ups to Glory, who's been like my little sidekick on Twitter, harassing people. Not really harassing. Well, I harass people. She's nice. But yeah, and thanks to Sam for the list that he made of all of the journalism schools and all of that stuff that we can contact. Everybody, please check that out. That's such a great idea. But yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Sarcasm Stardust. My show with Jesse is called Facts on the Ground. You can find that on YouTube. And yeah, that's about it. So yeah, thanks guys.
Yeah, I'd like to thank everybody for watching. And I'd definitely like to thank the super active Facebook chat that we've had lately. Props to go to you, Nat, for helping keep that going. You can find me on Twitter at Andrew Sigmund. You can find us at action underscore the number 4 Assange. All of the call to actions are down below in the description. But also you can find them on our website, which will be updated very, very soon. Josh has been working tirelessly on that, so big thank you to him. Yeah, thank you very much again, David, and I just want to say good luck to us all.
Good luck to us all.
Yeah.